In 1993, a massive explosion ripped under the two Twin Towers. In 1998, the U.S. embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam were bombed by terrorists. The U.S. president declares the group led by Osama bin Laden behind the attacks. In 2001, Massoud's death by al-Qaeda destabilized the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan. Hey there, welcome to Popcorn and Summaries. Today, we're diving into the 2018 war/action movie known as 12 Strong. But before we jump into the details, subscribing to the channel if you're into the commentary. Let's get right into it. Mitch Nelson, U.S. Army captain with Green Berets Operational Detachment Alpha, ODA, 595, is moving into a new home with his wife and daughter, Maddie, on September 11, 2001. He receives an assignment to staff duty under Lieutenant Colonel Bowers. While packing the stuff, he hears news of the blast at Twin Towers in New York on TV. After hearing the news of the devastating terrorist attacks, Nelson heads back to his department. He demands to get his old Unit 595 back in Afghanistan. Colonel Max Bowers doesn't want to give him his former command. The Chief Warrant Officer Hal Spencer, who was previously taking retirement, rips his retirement papers and convinces Bowers that Nelson, who has never been in battle, is the man for the job. Nelson resumes his position as captain of the team. At home, Spencer's wife, Marcia, and son are upset as he is leaving on a mission for a long period. Meanwhile, Nelson's wife, Jean, is also sad about sending him on a mission. Sam Deller asks his wife for time, but she doesn't find the courage to give him proper time. After leaving their families, 595 traveled to Uzbekistan on October 16, 2001. They arrived in their camp at the K2 base, north of Afghanistan. After being briefed and evaluated by Col Mulholland, commander of the 5th Special Forces Group, Nelson and 595 will fight alongside Northern Alliance leader Abdul Rashid Dostum. Col Mulholland explains the plan in which the Task Force Dagger, which consists of 12 men, including Nelson, has to meet with an Afghan warlord with the Northern Alliance, General Abdul Rashid Dostum, to take the city of Mazar-i-Sharif to stop the Taliban from spreading their forces around the land and to cripple bin Laden. The plan is to take out the Taliban with airstrikes. Colonel Mulholland gives him 6 weeks, but he demands 3 weeks, which impresses Colonel Mulholland. Nelson then explains the plan to his team. He gives information about the Northern Alliance, which has 200 men, and al-Qaeda, which has 50,000 men with a lot of weapons. The team is sent off to fly to Afghanistan. They land 40 miles south of Mazar-i-Sharif, the country's 4th largest city and a long-time stronghold of the Taliban. On arriving they are taken to a campsite by friends initially mistaken to be the enemy as they don't understand each other's language. The men meet with a CIA operative who tells them about the ongoing fight between some of the generals in the area fighting against the Taliban. In the morning, the Afghans suddenly start firing, which scares the TFD, but then they find out it is for the welcome of Dostum. The team then meets Dostum and his men. The team offers Dostum horse feed and vodka as gifts. Nelson sits and talks to Dostum to get him on their side. Dostum asks for the bombs, which the US promised to give him, but Nelson asks him to first tell him the Taliban location. They discuss how they will handle the Taliban, and then Dostum is ready to take them to the Taliban. Dostum had 6 extra horses, so only 6 members out of 12 could go with him. Nelson takes 6 men with him and leaves others in the camp under Spencer's command. Dostum tells them that the Taliban has put money on the team's head in their uniform. The Taliban are seen attacking a school for having a woman teach children. Their leader, Mullah Razan, scares the young students before killing the teacher to make an example of her. The team arrives in the cave, where they will stay for the night, and the next day they will fight with the Taliban. At night, Nelson has a discussion with Sam Deller about the toughness of the Taliban. Sam tells him that he knows the history of Afghanistan because he was a history teacher before joining the army. Dostum interrupts them, asking Nelson to order his men on the guard to take a rest as he must protect his guests, but Nelson says they are allies, not guests. Meanwhile, at the US K2 base, Colonel Mulholland receives information that Spencer, who is at camp, is asking for the weapons for Dostum's men. Nelson is at Kobaki, which confuses Col Mulholland as to why they have split. Nelson and Dostum spot the Taliban trucks moving from a distance. They try to figure out how they will initiate the airstrikes. Nelson wants to get closer to the Taliban to get a clear picture, and he is not sure that those men are Taliban, but Dostum wants to be careful since the US government can pull out if they lose even 1 American soldier, and that will kill his 50 men. Nelson soon calls in the airstrikes, but they miss most of the enemies. Nelson then takes the horse and gets closer to the enemy, but suddenly Taliban starts firing at him, which scares the team into risking Nelson's life. The soldiers then fight back against the Taliban once they start shooting at them. Several men on the Taliban side are killed, but the TFD team is safe. Meanwhile, Colonel Mulholland discussed with his team that the only way to Mazar is through the area of Beskum, which is controlled by the Taliban. He thinks he took the wrong guy for this mission, as Nelson does not know much about geography. Colonel Mulholland decides to send another team. The next move is to go through the Tiangi Gap to try and catch up to the Taliban. Nelson orders the team to throw firebombs, which kill many of the Taliban, but suddenly the team is attacked by the Taliban. During the battle, Nelson notices tanks from Taliban's men heading in, despite Nelson never being told that Taliban have tanks. After the fight, Nelson confronts Dostum for acting carelessly with the lives of his men and withholding this type of information since it could have risked lives. Nelson accuses Dostum of just being another warlord. While Dostum retorts that he still feels that Nelson and the US are not willing to pay the potential price of the conflict. They fear death, and without blood, victory is not possible. He tells Nelson that Muslims are not scared of death because they believe life after death is way more beautiful than current life. Dostum then tells Nelson that he needs to use his heart and mind to be a warrior instead of a soldier. At night, Dostum wakes Nelson up and discusses the plan. Dostum explains to him that the only way to Mazar Sharif is through Tiangi camp, which is the Taliban's choke point. They have to fight the Taliban at this point, and first, they have to take Beskum. After coming together on a better plan, Nelson explains the plan to his men. The three-man element under SFC Sam Diller will strike a Taliban supply route. Nelson calls Spencer and asks him to take the team and head towards them. Nelson is joined by Spencer's half of OTA 595 to meet up with a team from one of the rival warlords, as they plan to set several soldiers among the flanks to get to Razin before he and his men reach Mazar. Dostum doesn't like the idea at first, but Nelson convinces him it's the best plan they have made. The soldiers begins their attack against the Taliban, with airstrikes coming down and soldiers riding horses into battle. Nelson thinks that all of the Taliban are killed. He goes to the area with some of his men and Dostum's men, but suddenly Taliban men hiding inside the camp start shooting them. Nelson orders his men to cover Dostum and continue shooting. Many Taliban members are blown up or shot to death. They liberate Beecham village. Later, Dostum tells Nelson that when he was ruling Beskum, there were no restrictions on women. They had all the rights, including education, but then Razan took the area and killed his family. Nelson receives an email from Senior, who asks him to get to Mazar as soon as possible, and Nelson writes back that the situation is different on the ground. Spencer got hurt fighting and was resting when he called Nelson and told him about the other team. Nelson informs Dostum that another OTA, 555, has been dispatched to support Atta Muhammad, another Northern Alliance leader who is Dostum's political rival, to capture Mazar city from the opposite side. Dostum gets angry, telling Nelson that the area they are planning to attack is under the Taliban, who have heavy machine guns and foreign fighters. They will not let his men die, so Atta Muhammad takes the Mazar Sharif. Dostum decides to leave the team as he cannot let his rival win. He and his men promptly abandon 595. Following Dostum's departure, Nelson meets his men and tells them that now they are on their own to fight the Taliban. He is angry as they are too close to their goal, but if they abandon the mission, the Taliban will again attack the US. Nelson plans to continue operating against the Taliban with his Americans and the few Afghan fighters remaining with them. Nelson explains his plan to the team and then splits into small groups and surrounds the city from different locations. They are looking at the Taliban from afar and are ordering them to throw bombs at them, which kills many of the Taliban. Encountering a large force of Al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters and armored vehicles, OTA 595, rejoined by Diller and his element, uses air support to eliminate many of the fighters and most of the armor but is discovered and attacked. Meanwhile, a group of Taliban surrendered to Spencer. Spencer does not understand why they are surrendering. The men get closer to the team when the suicide bomber in the group blasts himself, revealing the plan of the group. Spencer is critically injured by a suicide bomber, and the team is about to be overrun under heavy Taliban and Al-Qaeda pressure when Dostum returns with his forces, but suddenly the Taliban starts attacking with missiles, making it difficult for the team to fight. Nelson carries out the US Army's first cavalry charge of the 21st century and enters the location of the Taliban, followed by the Dostum's men, killing everyone. The American and Northern Alliance forces disperse the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Razin attempts to get away in a van, but he crashes and is left with nowhere to go as Dostum corners him, puts a bullet in his head, and kills Razin. Nelson meets the remaining team, which is carrying the injured Spencer. The plane arrives to take Spencer for treatment. Nelson and Dostum continued to Mazar-i-Sharif. On arriving, they find out that Atta Muhammad has beaten the Taliban there. Dostum shakes hands with Atta Muhammad and tells Nelson that they will discuss this with Atta tomorrow. Nelson is impressed, but Atta provides him with information that many empires invaded Afghanistan before, but they changed their loyalty every day. The next day, he leaves any differences with Muhammad to be settled. Impressed by Nelson and the Americans' efforts, Dostum gives Nelson his prized riding crop and tells him that he will always consider Nelson a brother and fellow fighter, while at the same time reminding him that Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires. Spencer ultimately survives, and all 12 soldiers of OTA 595 return home after 23 days of almost continuous fighting in Afghanistan. At the end, a photo of the horse soldier statue shows up at the World Trade Center in New York City, based on the soldiers of OTA 595 and their victory in the early stages of the response to the September 11th attacks, dedicated to all United States Special Forces. If you enjoyed this gripping recap, show your support by hitting the like button and don't forget to subscribe to be the first to catch our upcoming videos.